Hello, we're going to talk about Chapter 11, which is about global location decisions. So, we talked a little bit earlier in Chapter 9 about global logistics. So, this is going to be about whether you should produce in other countries or whether how to choose those countries and where they should be. So, we're going to talk about the impact that location decision makes on the supply chain. Think about before COVID, how many things were made in China, and now how many people are trying to bring things back because of their complete disruption to the supply chain before COVID. No one had considered that. So identifying the factors that influence location decision, understanding how a lot of trade agreements that are made in different regions affect location decisions, some evaluation models, business clusters, and because this book has to, we're going to talk a little bit about sustainable development on facility location. So here's an overview of what's in this chapter. So the very first thing that we're going to talk about on slide 4 here is that facility location affects the efficiency and the effectiveness of the entire supply chain, and it can either create or deter or detract from a firm's competitive advantage. I'm sure you remember, but competitive advantage is the advantage that you either have or don't have over other people who are trying to sell the exact same thing that you're trying to sell. So companies can locate anywhere in the world because now the internet and access to technology has made it where it's very easy. We've discovered a lot of people that thought they could never do their jobs at home can do their jobs at home during this pandemic. So we figured that out. But location still does matter. We're going to talk a little bit about industry clusters. If you think about some of the high tech that's in Austin, Texas, or you hear people talk about the Silicon Valley in California, if you think about the financial markets in cities like London or New York City, there's definitely some industry clusters that have been created and that are geographically concentrated. The last thing we're going to talk about is how decisions are very important in figuring out the role of the company and whether or not it can reach the markets that it wants to serve, that are going to have the highest percentage of customers that want to actually buy the product or service that the company is selling. So the things that we want to do here is we want to look at cost, we want to look at the performance of the supply chain, we want to look at how the location is going to impact the competitive strategy. If you're selling a product that's made in, for example, Mexico, and it can get here quickly and most of your customers are in Houston, that may be a brilliant decision. But if you've got most of your customers are here in Houston and you have a product and it's coming from somewhere that's overseas and it takes maybe 4 to 6 weeks to get here on a ship. If you remember that from the chapter on logistics, a ship is the slowest way, but it's the cheapest way. So that might be not as advantageous to your supply chain to have things made far away. Or it could be really great because it could be less expensive to make it overseas and the cost could be offset by that length of time it takes things to get here. So it could be okay. You want to look at the speed of delivery, how Amazon or FedEx or a lot of these really large companies have a far reach, put distribution centers in different places and then go out to the specific locations from those distribution centers. And then how to get the most out of your facilities that are not based in the country where you are, and figuring out what the strategic role that you want them to have is going to be in your business. So that's a lot of words. Let's talk about how we're going to do that. These are on your test. You need to know the differences between each of these on slide 6. An offshore factory means we're in the United States. An offshore factory would be someplace like the Philippines, China, Vietnam. Low cost, low labor. A source factory is a factory where the plant is involved in supplier selection and production planning, and they are providing raw material or semi-finished goods to you in another country. A server factory, and I don't want you to think about this as server like a computer server. I want you to think about this like this is a factory that is acting as a server for another factory. So they're there because the government in that particular country maybe has really favorable incentives. Maybe the exchange risk with the currency in that country is good and the tariff situation is favorable so that you can pay a low amount of taxes and a relatively low amount of logistics cost. A contributor factory is a firm that says we're going to do some product development, we're going to design, we're going to engineer, We're going to do some planning. We're going to help you figure out who the suppliers should be and develop some new suppliers. And then a different factory will finish the actual manufacturing such that it's ready to ship to the customer. An outpost factory means that you've got a whole bunch of suppliers, sometimes in a business cluster, that are all in one place, and they're producing parts for you or sending things that are semi-manufactured to you. And then a lead factory is the place that is innovating, bringing up new products, designing things so that you continue to stay ahead of the market. Here is a chart that you can use. I'm going to go to the next slide, but this is a chart that you can use to figure out what those decisions should be and how they matter from a country standpoint, from a region or a state standpoint, or a community standpoint. So think about if you were in another country, you were deciding to open something in the United States. Opening something in New York City or opening something in like Des Moines, Iowa is completely different, right? The cost would be different. The labor available, I'm sorry, that's my dog. The labor available would be different, etc. So that's one of the things that you want to talk about. We also want to talk about what the regional trade agreements are and how the World Trade Organization can help give you information. So the World Trade Organization is the only organization that says that they're going to have purview over what the rules of trade between different nations are going to be, and they help arbitrate disputes and all kinds of things. There are more than 159 members right now. Under President Trump, we had some issues with the WTO, but I believe that we will probably be back in the WTO pretty quickly after President Biden takes office in January. Their goal is to help anyone who makes goods or services, who exports or who imports, do business with other countries. This is things that the WTO does. This is on your tests. Agreements, they are a place to do trade negotiations. They arbitrate disputes. They make sure that policies are fair. They provide aid to countries that are still getting their feet under them, third and fourth and fifth world countries. And they work with other international organizations like the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, etc., to help facilitate trade. Global trade, I should say, not just trade, global trade. So here are some examples of some regional trade agreements. You had NAFTA in the prior chapter. You should know about Mercosur. Mercosur was signed in 1991. It's in 5 countries in South America. The ASEAN agreement is a bunch of organizations all in Southeast Asia. And then you should know about the EU, which is the very first one on here. The EU is the most tightly integrated of all of these, having a common currency and relatively no trade barriers between countries. So if you buy something in France, you want to ship it to Spain, if both countries belong to the EU, there's no tax between those countries. And they use the same currency, so there's no reason to worry about currency exchange because everyone's using the euro. So a measure of a country's advantage or disadvantage in selling its products in international markets. That's what the competitiveness of a nation means. It means, is it easier for someone who makes a product in Mexico or Canada to sell their product in the United States? The IMD publishes the World Competitiveness Yearbook. I used to give a project in this class. I didn't do it this semester because you're online and I feel like you have enough work to do. So these are the 4 categories of factors that the IMD assesses. What does the economic performance look like? Is the government efficient? And not just is the government efficient, but are the policies that the government has, the laws in the country, do they promote competitiveness? Do they promote fraud? Do they promote bribery and corruption? Or are they geared toward having things be competitive and fair? How much the environment in that country wants businesses to perform in a way that makes money, is responsible to the environment, and is introducing new products? And then what is the infrastructure available? So if you think about a country like India has very, very, very high tech in some areas, and there are places where people live in, homes that have dirt floors and huts. So there's a very big disparity there. There is in the United States as well. Lots of countries have this, but I want you to think about the fact that there are places that have really, really advanced technology, and there are places in countries that have not internet. There's no internet. Maybe there's not water readily available to people's homes, et cetera, or to businesses. So you need to assess what that infrastructure looks like as well. Here is a just snapshot out of the one from 2013-14. All right, so the things, this is on your test, the things that you're going to be assessing for competitiveness are institutions. This is things like government, hospitals, roads, etc. Infrastructure is part of that same thing. How steady and stable is the economy? How readily available is healthcare and education? How easy or hard is it to get goods to the market? How expensive or inexpensive is labor there? How sophisticated is the financial market there? What the technological readiness is. So that's things like, are there people educated to become software engineers or design engineers or whatever, doctors, whatever it may be that your product would need or your service would need, as well as is there infrastructure and people educated to support that infrastructure? How big is the market? So how many people live there? What the business sophistication is, and what their attitude or appetite for innovation is. Are they looking for new products that are doing something in a great new way, or is that not important? We talked about free trade or foreign trade zones in the last couple of chapters, but you should just remember that many countries do have these available, so you can ship things into an airport or a port, and you can bring them in duty free as inputs to production. Do what you need to do, assemble them, finish them, modify them, whatever, and then ship them out without having to pay additional tax. You should all understand what currency stability is about. We've all seen other countries where currency is really devalued. Whether or not they have issues with the environment. Is the water clean? Is the air clean? Do they have problems with the way that things are disposed, such that it's not safe to grow food in the soil, things like that. Access and proximity to markets. So you want to think about the fact that relocation, this is an example, relocation to China does give you inexpensive labor, but also it gives you access to that market because now you're in that country with a business that you've created there. So proximity to the customers is even more crucial. So you need to think about the fact that if your service is that you run a barbershop, you can't run a barbershop in Houston for people in Mexico, right? Or people in Spain. If you have a service, a lot of times you have to be where the customer is because the service is delivered where the customer is. I can't have a business that does landscaping if I live in a different country, right? I can only do landscaping for people where my workers can be where the customers are. You also want to think about labor issues, whether or not there are people that are going to want to work for the skill, the pay that you have. Do they understand it? Do people change jobs a lot? What are the employment trends? Are there going to be suppliers that you can get to in this country, or is it going to be difficult if you move to another country to get suppliers to ship there, maybe because customs is complex or maybe because it's expensive? How much electricity or how much internet is going to cost. When I did my study abroad in India, every day, and this is like this in Europe as well too, we had to stick our hotel room key in the wall, and that would make the power come on in the room. But you were unable to leave a phone plugged in to charge or leave a laptop plugged in to charge if you were not in your room, and that's how they helped people conserve electricity. So we also did not have water at our hotel. We had to wait for water to be brought in every day and put into a giant vat, and when it was gone, there was no more water. So that, utilities and access to electricity and internet and water is very important. Quality of life issues are also very, very important. Do people value education? Is there a vibrant economy? Do people care about the environment? What's the situation as far as social well-being and things like arts and culture? Are there parks? Are people in general healthy? Is there access to healthcare? Is there good government? Can you get around from place to place safely? And are there roads to take you there? And do you feel safe? All of these things need to be considered, especially if you're trying to move employees of your company in the United States to this other country to help stand up or run this business. There may be reasons why people would say, I want my children to go to American schools, and if they can't, I want them to go to good schools in another country, and that may not be available. So you need to consider that. Right to work laws say that you cannot have unions. You need to consider about whether or not you're going to have to contend with a union in another country in order to get or keep your workers employed. How much land it costs and how much it costs to pay taxes on it, and whether or not you should locate in the city or in the suburbs or in a rural area. So all of this is going to be put together into a rating model, and we're going to score it and assign a weight to every factor. So you've seen this before, but you give a weight. Labor cost is going to be 20%. Proximity to the market is going to be 15%. We're going to score the 3 countries. We're going to do the math, and we're going to realize that China is the recommended country here. I didn't put this on your test, but you should just understand this concept. We use it for supplier scoring. We use it for lots of different things. We use it for a variety of things in the supply chain to say, how important is this factor? Let's grade it. Let's do the math. And then let's figure out by a quantitative analysis which one of these choices is the best choice to make. All right, the break-even model. This is, you use this probably in your own life, you just don't realize it. The break-even model is basically saying, if I save money on labor, for example, but it's going to cost me more in shipping, at what point do I make the decision that it's better to go to this other country? You know, where do I break even? Where does the money start making sense? So maybe I have to spend a lot of money to buy land and build a factory and interview employees and all these things, and you're going to calculate all that cost, but then you're going to look at all the things that you're going to save money on, and you're going to make a model that looks like this, and then you're going to chart it, and you're going to say, it makes sense that these are my break-even points for these different locations. This is a lot of math. This is a system would normally do this for you too. I just kind of wanted to talk you through the logic of how you would get there. You don't need to understand all this math. You would never do it by hand anymore. So to look at location analysis, there's 2 locations I gave, or 2 website locations I gave you here that can help with information about business locations and how to make a good selection. Business clusters are what I talked about earlier. So if you think about the financial clusters in New York City or in London, if you think about Silicon Valley in California, where there's a lot of research parks, there's a lot of technology, where in Seattle, Washington, where Microsoft now and Amazon are both based, there's a lot of technology in that. So the reasons that those work well generally is that the companies come together and they work with each other, not against each other, or that there's very fierce rivalry and it makes everybody better because everybody is really trying to bring their A game every day. It's easier to get skilled workers because there's already people that want to come to that part, and that competitive environment makes everybody be hugely more innovative and hopefully more profitable. We have to have the sustainable development. So we want to make sure that as we're building new factories and doing those things, that we're doing them with the green development kind of lens, that we're building buildings that are energy efficient and that are making good use of natural resources. So there is a United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that talks about global warming and how businesses should be created and buildings should be built to be as energy efficient as possible. So this is the last slide in this chapter. You'll hear the terms additive manufacturing, and you'll hear the terms 3D printing. They're the same thing. What it says is, I need this part, and I can print it on a 3D printer if I have a file that tells me exactly what it should look like. So rather than either manufacturing something that I only need 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 of and having to wait, or even if I order hundreds of them or thousands of them, maybe I need one quickly, having the ability to make one quickly with a 3D printer is very beneficial. And you can see some reasons why here. Much quicker. You can customize each one. You don't have to order 100 just to get maybe 15 that you need. You can have extremely complex shapes. You can have anything that you need on demand, and lower energy consumption and very efficient raw material use. So this may keep businesses from going overseas for their manufacturing needs. There's also now a lot of places that do this as a service. So if you need something 3D printed, you don't have to make the investment of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in this equipment. You can take your file to this just like you would take a Word or Excel or a PowerPoint file to a Kinko's or a place like that. This is a service bureau that's like that has a variety of 3D printers, and they can print for you. So that's the end of chapter 11, and we will move on now to chapter 12.